So today I'm going to tell you my birth story, which in all honesty was a wild one. It really didn't go according to plan. A lot of unusual things happened, and honestly, it was really difficult with lots of twists and turns. But I also want to reassure you, if you're watching this and you're currently pregnant looking toward giving birth, that the nice thing about my story is that it has a happy ending. We have a healthy baby girl who is so sweet. I'm doing a lot better now, and so even though things did not go according to plan, not that I even really had that much of a plan, but even though in my story things went off the rails a bit, I have to say, we're on the other side of it and we're so happy now and just sinking into the experience of being parents and loving it. I'm making this video because I personally watched a lot of birth story videos before giving birth and I found it really helpful. And then also this is a way for me to remember what happened. It's almost like a diary of what occurred because already it's been about 2 months. Already I'm starting to forget things and not remember the experience, and I want to remember it. So I guess I'll jump into when I was in my 9th month of pregnancy, heading toward the end. I started developing some symptoms of preeclampsia. My blood pressure was skyrocketing, and I historically have had very low blood pressure, so low that I never thought preeclampsia would be a thing for me, although obviously anyone can get it. I don't know why I thought that way, but it felt very unexpected. And then I also experienced a lot of swelling, just so much water weight, where my feet and legs were expanding hugely. I had so much swelling in my hands that I experienced a lot of pain, so much so that when I'd wake up in the morning, it was like hard to move my hands, even to do things like open a door with a doorknob. And then my face was swelling too, to the point where toward the end, I sounded really different, like speaking was mechanically difficult or different for me. And basically, I just overall felt like I couldn't do anything. I also have MS, so that could be a factor in this too, but I just had a lot of fatigue and it was just hard to function. So near the end, you have regular doctor's appointments, and my OB was saying if your blood pressure goes above a certain threshold that I should call in to see if I should come in to the birth center. And so I kept going past that threshold and I kept calling in what felt like every day or every other day. And they would say, yep, you need to come into the hospital. So I'd go in and I'd get checked out. They would monitor the baby for a while, check my vitals, run some labs. And every day that I would go in, they'd say, we want to push this pregnancy as long as possible, especially, in weeks 35, 36. It would be nicer if you could give birth later than this. So they would send me home. And then the same thing would happen all over again. So it was day after day of this. I was physically really feeling pretty uncomfortable, and I was ready to have this baby. I was like, I'm ready to meet her, get this baby out of me, let's do this. But they kept putting it off since it was still safe for me to be pregnant. Until one day, it was another one of those days where I'd called in. I assumed I was not going to be giving birth that day or starting the process. So I didn't even wash my hair that day. I took a shower, but it was like day 3 hair. And I was like, it's not going to be today, so I'm not even going to wash my hair. I'm going to be back home later today. And I went in and they said, your preeclampsia is concerning and you're at 37 weeks, so we think we'd like to induce.
Who has preeclampsia? I do. Who has preeclampsia? That's me.
Now, another piece of this, I got to give context. My baby had been in breech for a long time. Actually, the entire pregnancy, my baby had been in breech. So eventually my doctor had recommended that I schedule a C-section, which I had done. But right at the very last minute, she flipped. And so then they said, we think it's safe to move forward with an induction and not do a C-section. So already I had to change my mindset and accept it looks like I'm going to have a C-section, and I had not wanted that off the bat. So I had come to accept that. But now I was kind of being thrown in the other direction yet again. Okay, we're going to do an induction. And so that also didn't feel extremely thrilling because I had just come around to, maybe there are positives of having a C-section. So it was a lot of back and forth, but there are higher risks of long-term serious consequences or complications of C-sections. So I thought, that's great. Let's let's try for the induction. So they started giving me the medications to induce labor. Eventually, they also put a balloon in, which basically helps open up the cervix. And they told me ahead of time that the balloon would not hurt, that it might hurt when they put it in, but that it was more just uncomfortable. I will say that was not my experience. It was painful the entire time. And so my first night in the hospital, I had the balloon in and I was up a lot of that night because I was in so much pain. Eventually I was having contractions and all of that, and they were painful. One thing that was weird about my contractions is that even early on in labor, I was getting contractions so frequently. And basically they have a monitor on you that also monitors the contractions, which I didn't really realize ahead of time, that they're actually looking at when the contractions happen. And they would show me on this little graph thing that basically I would have a contraction and then about a second later, another contraction would come. So I was having these constant contractions, which is not typical, they said. So it was a lot of pain with very little respite from that pain. At a certain point, I was kind of asking, when do I get an epidural? Because I had planned to have an epidural. I didn't have very many plans for labor, but one thing I did know is that I did want some kind of pain management in my birth. So I wanted a medicated birth, which actually, now that I say out loud, I feel like it's something I never hear people say. I hear far more often people trying for unmedicated births or just not really saying anything about pain management. But I think that's striking in that, according to Yale Medicine, people who are giving birth, 70 to 75% of them do have an epidural. And that doesn't even necessarily include other types of pain management that might be used. And so the vast majority of people do use pain management, and that's normal and honestly awesome that we have these options. And I don't want to get too far off track, but I do think that I felt implicit pressure to experience the pain of labor. I felt like maybe I'd be missing out on something beautiful about the experience of labor if I didn't experience the pain of it. I also feel like I've had a lot of people in my life who've given birth who've said things like, oh, I got the epidural at the last possible second, almost like a badge of honor. And I do get that maybe they're just trying to communicate like I experienced a lot of pain in the process. But I also think that there's nothing shameful about asking for pain management. And I think that in our society, there's a lot of implicit pressure on women to burden pain and discomfort and smile through it. I think this is very topical to me because I actually just worked on a 10-part audio documentary series all about the world of ballet. And that was a huge theme that came forth in that series that I worked on, about how women are quite often conditioned to tolerate pain, to live with it, to not show signs of it, to sort of smile through it. Everybody's allowed to approach their birth experience the way they want to experience it. I'm not trying to poo-poo any sort of approach to pain management. Like if you're somebody who does not want pain management, you're allowed to do that if that's meaningful to you, if that's how you want to try to approach it. I'm more saying I personally, at least in my experience, had felt a little bit of shame in wanting medication or in wanting an epidural. I don't think I should have had to feel that. And so I just wanted to mention that if you're feeling that too, if you're somebody who's looking to get an epidural, but you feel like, oh, am I not hardcore enough? You know what? You're hardcore. Giving birth is hard no matter what. And I think it's awesome to try to help you manage your pain. We have the medicine to be able to do it. I think plenty of people who have non-medicated births get plenty of other medical interventions, and I think it's perfectly understandable to want pain management is all I'm saying. Anyway, so that was one thing I knew, was that I wanted some kind of pain management and that I had planned to do an epidural if I was going to be induced. It was around this time that I kept asking, when do I get the epidural? I'm in pain, but I can live with it. When do I get it? And they kept just giving me the answer, whenever you think, because it's also true that once you get the epidural, you can't really get up and move around. I just didn't know, how long is this labor going to be? If it's going to be super long, I might want to be able to move for a while longer. So I kind of kept waiting on it. But that was one thing I didn't expect going in. I kind of thought that quite often there would be a point where the doctor or the nurses would say, it really seems like now is the right time for an epidural if you've planned to do an epidural. It wasn't like that. They were kind of leaving it in my lap which is great in a way in that I was in control of the situation, but also that little voice in my head saying, you gotta be hardcore, kept putting it off, if that made sense. Like, I felt a little self-conscious to ask for an epidural a little too early on, or I thought, maybe I would regret it in some ways. I don't know. Anyway, I kind of kept putting it off, and I was able to manage the pain, so I just kept going with it. And eventually, after just more time had passed, all of that, my water still hadn't broken, so they artificially broke my water. And that's when the pain really skyrocketed. It was truly out of control, intense pain. Again, my contractions were so close together that it was essentially one long 20-minute at a time contraction, and it was going on like that, on and on and on. And it was so painful. I was shaking physically. I can say, I really experienced the height of contractions, I would say. It was really, really intense. So obviously at that point I was like, I need the epidural now. And so the anesthesiologist came in, and it was hard at that point. This is why they also say you shouldn't wait too long for the epidural, because I could not sit still. I was physically shaking as a reaction to the pain. I literally could not be still. So they had to kind of like hold me down and try to help me breathe so that they could put the needle in and do the epidural. So they did the epidural. However, what I noticed was that while maybe one of my legs was numb-ish, the other was not. And essentially the epidural wasn't working. I was in so much pain. I had been going through labor now for over 24 hours. And this was kind of my worst nightmare because, like I said, I knew that I had wanted pain management and a medicated birth. And so to be in that level of pain and to feel like there was no way out, it was terrifying. And I knew that this might happen because I do have a spinal fusion. Basically, I broke my back as a child many years ago. That's a whole nother story. Because of my spinal fusion, I knew that the epidural might have some trouble working, but I kind of just assumed that it would work, but it didn't. I was just sitting there feeling hopeless and overwhelmed and really just in the pain. When you're in that much pain, you can't think much. You're just in the pain trying to get through. You know that it's not going to last forever. That's what I kept reminding myself. I just have to get through this. And that was helpful to me, just to remember this is not forever. Your only job right now is to get through this pain. Throughout all of this, Andy was right by my side, and he was holding my hand and just being such a support. And at this point, when the epidural wasn't working and I was in so much pain, crying and screaming, basically, I felt like it was all very dramatic. And so did he. I remember he was crying because he could see I was in so much pain and there was no escape from it. At that point, they also gave me pain medication like opioids, which normally they never do after giving an epidural, but I was just in so much pain and there was no escaping it that they were trying to manage the pain in some way. I also just physically, I could feel what was happening down there, and I just felt like this was not going to work. I think instinctually it was like my body was like, this is not going to work. We had been throwing around the idea of a C-section anyway. Eventually, in talking with my doctor, we just decided, I want a C-section. And at that point, even the anesthesiologists were like adjusting the needle, trying to make it work, telling me to push the button to have more of the medicine for the epidural to go into my body. But I kept telling them, no, that's not working. Like, yes, it's numbing my right leg a bit, but my left leg is not numb and it's not stopping the pain. Even though they were great, they were nice, they were trying to help. But I basically felt as though I don't have the time to keep trying something that's not working. Finally, I go in to get the C-section, and I don't know, one thing that was really kind of sweet was this had all just happened so quickly. I realized, I still have jewelry on from just what I had had on from the day before. And I asked the doctor, is it okay for me to have jewelry on? Just because I know I get so many MRIs because I have MS that, you need to take jewelry off for that. I didn't know what was necessary for a C-section. So I asked about that, and the surgeon, the OB was like, it's okay to have the jewelry on, but actually maybe you should take off your bracelet just in case there's sudden swelling or something. And so she ended up taking it off for me and like fiddling with it for 5 minutes. And I was like, how is it that this surgeon is taking the time to take off my bracelet? I even told her, wait, what are you doing? This is ridiculous. You don't need to do that. And she was like, no, I got it. It was so nice. I gotta say, one thing throughout this experience is I experienced so much kindness from a variety of people in the hospital. I was treated so well at various points. So I remember I got into the OR and I looked up and, they had the oxygen mask on me. And so because the epidural didn't work, and then it was also contraindicated for me to have a spinal, which is another form of anesthesia that's a lot like an epidural that numbs you down from the bottom half, which is why, either quite often for a C-section, you either get an epidural or a spinal. These days, more often a spinal. So quite often you're awake for the C-section. Well, in my case, because of my MS and the fact that a spinal could make lesions in my spine that exist symptomatic that are not currently, they recommended that we not do a spinal. So epidural was out, spinal was out, so that meant I had to go under general anesthesia, which I did not want, was not the experience I wanted. I wanted to be able to see my baby moments after giving birth, but that was just not in the cards for me. So I remember going into the OR and they had the oxygen mask on my face, and I was just at this point in so much pain, so uncomfortable. I felt like I couldn't breathe, which I don't know, I don't tend to have that type of problem or anything, but I felt like just so uncomfortable. I was like taking the oxygen mask off of my face and saying, I can't breathe, get this off of me. I don't know. Eventually, they gave me the anesthesia. I went under and had the C-section. When I woke up, I was in the recovery room and just feeling really loopy and out of it. A lot of it is kind of hazy in my memory, but eventually Andy walked in with our little girl in his arms and showed her to me, and I got to hold her and place her on my chest, and it was such a beautiful emotional moment. And I don't know, it just was unreal, That was so exciting, and I could tell how happy and excited Andy was too. It was just really wonderful. Yeah, I don't even know how to describe it, but just to have her there, it was amazing. But I also remember after the surgery still having a lot of pain and being super, super thirsty. So I kept chugging water and apple juice, and the nurse there was so nice. She kept just bringing more and more to me. I guess I was still bleeding a lot. They even showed me, they pulled out this kind of like tube thing that sucks up blood from inside of me. They pulled it out and showed me, and there was this long tube that had taken so much blood out of me. And what I soon discovered was that my C-section, while it was overall successful, obviously, there were some complications. So I had lost a lot of blood. Though we didn't really realize it at the time, I was continuing to bleed internally. And so I was in a lot of pain. It was just a weird experience where I was so sleepy. So even in the recovery room, even though I was so excited to see our daughter, I also was having trouble even just like staying conscious, kind of. That probably was the anesthesia, but it was just a weird state of being. But it was so nice to have Andy and our daughter sitting right there by my side. Anyway, fast forward, I guess, to the next morning. I'm still in a lot of pain, and eventually what we realize is that I have an internal infection, so I go on antibiotics. We also realize that, I lost half of my blood. My hemoglobin was half of what it was before. And also, while giving birth is sort of a treatment for preeclampsia, sometimes the preeclampsia can also get worse after giving birth. So in some ways, it was getting worse after giving birth, and I was swelling up even more. Eventually, I was in so much pain, they decided to give me a CT to see what was going on internally. And so what they found was that I had a large hematoma, which is basically like sort of a collection of blood or a blood clot in my abdomen from all this. And so it basically suggested that I was continuing to bleed internally after the surgery. Looking at the findings from the CT and everything, they said, we need to get you back into a second surgery. And at that point, I was in so much pain. It's kind of like in those times when it's just so difficult. You don't even worry about like, oh no, another surgery. I don't want to have to do that. There was none of that. It was just like, okay, let's do this. Let's go back into surgery. And so they brought me across the hospital, and I was in there getting ready to, be put under again when the doctor said, I looked at your CT again and I considered these other things, and I actually think that the bleeding has slowed or stopped, and that maybe we can get by with not doing this surgery and see how you do. I was like, okay, if that's what you think, let's not have the surgery. If I can avoid another surgery, that would be great. But it was all very dramatic in that I was getting rolled around to different parts of the hospital for the CT and for this surgery, and it was all a whirlwind, and everyone seemed kind of concerned. So I was kind of scared in the process. I was like, what is going to happen to me? Am I, going to have serious consequences to this? Am I even dying? Like, internal bleeding just sounded really scary to me. But anyway, I went back to my hospital room and they just kind of kept monitoring me. I got multiple transfusions of blood. I got multiple transfusions of iron because of all the blood loss. They're giving me antibiotics, and physically, I was just so weak and in so much pain. It was hard to move at all. And so I had a catheter in for days and days. At one point, they took the catheter out, but then they had to put it back in because I just physically couldn't get out of bed. I was in so much pain. And what was hard is the nurses kept telling me, like, what's good for you is to walk around and move around. We later realized I was not a typical C-section case. In most C-sections, yes, that's what you want to do. You want to get your digestion moving, you want to move around. But when you're bleeding to this degree internally and you have a hematoma, it is so painful to even move or adjust in bed at all. It was just really, really hard for me to do anything. So they put the catheter back in so I didn't even have to go to the bathroom as often. Luckily, through all this, our girl was doing well, and Andy was really watching out for her. I tried to hold her when I could and be there with her, and I was also starting the whole breastfeeding thing, but it was actually physically hard for me to hold her at all. Like, I'd have to put a pillow on my lap and place her on that because it was so painful to hold anything or to move at all. And so Andy really stepped up and was just there doing so much. In some ways, it kind of blows my mind how long we were actually there. All the days just started blending together. Eventually, after 10 days in the hospital, Andy and I just started packing up our bags. I was starting to improve a bit, and we just kind of emphasized we wanted to go home. And eventually the doctor said, okay, I guess I feel comfortable letting you go home. So editing Aylin here, a couple things I realized I forgot to mention that I think might just be interesting are that, first of all, I guess the doctor told me it turned out that somehow with the shape of my pelvis, my baby could not have come through. So it was good we did the C-section. And then second, in the preeclampsia that I experienced after giving birth, I continued to swell up and it was pretty darn intense. And I say that just to normalize the fact that I actually gained weight after giving birth. So even after I gave birth, I went to an even higher weight because of all the swelling that was happening. I don't even think I was eating because I wasn't allowed to eat at certain points because of the complications. Sorry, Ginger's scratching here. But I just want to normalize the fact that that can happen too. In a lot of ways, things could have been so much worse. I'm so grateful that our daughter was healthy. Now, she did lose weight after giving birth, which is normal, but she lost so much weight that I was later told she would have had to be hospitalized anyway as well. And so in a way, it was good that we were in the hospital for me so that she could be monitored as well because she was losing a lot of weight. But I didn't know that it was to a dangerous degree at the time, and I'm almost grateful for that because I don't know if I could have handled that. But overall, she seemed to be doing fairly well given everything, so that was really important to me, and that was good. I will say one silver lining to being in the hospital for this long and physically not being able to move much at all was that Andy was sort of forced into doing everything for the baby, really getting involved in diaper changes, holding her, even doing some feedings and all that. And it allowed him, I think, to gain some confidence in taking care of our baby. And it got to the point where even when we got home, he was teaching me how to do things. It was really cool in that I think the stereotype is that the mom tends to know everything and is teaching the dad how to do things. But it was incredible how he was really learning and how he grew so much and was taking on so much. And I will forever be grateful to him for that because, I don't know, he just really stepped up and was there for me and her our daughter, and that was really meaningful. And it also just made it easier on me, even transitioning to home, to have somebody who was so hands-on and doing so much. And so even the recovery after getting home was honestly really hard. I was in a lot of pain. It was hard for me to do much of anything. I couldn't really move around at all. I definitely couldn't go upstairs and things like that. And I will say, for those of you who are looking forward to a C-section or something, I don't think that's normal. And that's something I heard time and time again from the doctors, is that my experience was not normal. And I even remember this one appointment with my OB after the fact, where she kind of very seriously brought up, just so you know, you might look at other people and compare yourself and look at their recoveries, and it seems like they're recovering so much faster. Just know that you had serious complications. This is not typical at all, even for a C-section. And so this has been a slow recovery process. I will say I am so much better than I was. I'm functioning far more normally. I'm doing things. I'm in a lot better place than I was, but I still am so far from back to normal. It's hard for me to do things physically. I can tell that I'm still recovering, and I do still have pain. Luckily, the pain isn't all the time anymore, which is really good, but it's been a long road. And I do think that, in the recovery process, it is important to not overly compare yourself and not judge yourself for not being able to do things fast enough or that sort of thing. It's like everybody is on their own journey. Everybody makes their own choices in the birthing process, but then also there's a lot you can't control, and you just have to kind of go with it. And I also really appreciated that OB after the fact also brought up, birth trauma is a real thing, and a lot of people experience it, and it's not something that's often discussed. And for her to even use the word trauma, which is not a word I had really used to describe the experience, it was just very validating and made me feel like, what I went through was hard. It was painful. It was extended in a way that isn't typically, but that can happen. And also it is so worth it because we love our little baby, and she has brought us so much joy. It's like when she wakes up, she just comes alive in this incredible way, the way she looks around and explores the world. And I don't know, I love doing things like giving her a tour of the plants in our home or making up songs with her. She loves music and she loves to dance. I swear, even more than most babies, she will always calm down to a song and a little bouncy session. It's really sweet. I'm just over the moon grateful to have her. Really, really grateful, especially because it was a long process for us, because we did IVF because of infertility, and it was a years long process for us. So to be here at this point where we have a baby and she's healthy and she's doing well, and I'm recovering more and more all the time and doing a lot better. I mean, this really does have a happy ending to this story, and it's just getting better and better all the time. Like, even though those first few weeks and even number of weeks, months after birth, they have been really, really hard, all the time it's getting better. And that's a hopeful message I want to send to for those of you who are maybe even in recovery right now. Hopefully it will just get better and better with time. I also want to acknowledge that although my experience was challenging and difficult, it certainly wasn't the hardest experience out there. There are some birth stories that really blow my mind, and I do feel fortunate that I had the medical care that I did have to address the complications and an amazing support system. I am grateful for the place that I'm in now, and just excited to see what's to come in the future. Anyway, that's most of my story. If you stuck around this long, I guess thanks for listening. Thank you so much for spending this little bit of time with me, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.